Chapter 19, One Good Day Yashunar Village, 337 Solar Year. Following the wedding between Syra and Marcus, the two sides resumed diplomatic talks. Over the next few months, all the little political minutiae was worked out as contracts and treaties were drawn up and approved by each side. The only thing left to do now really was deal with the practical matters of distance. Even with the island nation's latest shipbuilding technology, the distance between the two countries was still considerable, even in good seafaring weather. What if the weather became too dangerous to sail in? Or what if those ships got stuck in the middle of the open sea? They would have no safe port with which to make for and wait out the storm. So, an idea had been thrown around a few times that perhaps a port colony needed to be established somewhere in between the two nations. However, neither side could agree on who would pay for it, maintain it, and patrol it, let alone where this would-be port would even be located. After weeks and weeks of talking, it became clear to Aelin that everyone was getting burned out and needed a break. Plus, Falena was experiencing an unseasonably hotter summer than normal. Thus, it was agreed on by all that they would adjourn for now and meet up again on the 15th of next month. Moreover, since next week was a big holiday for the island nations, some time off seemed all the more appropriate. It was the Federation's 30th anniversary since the founding of their nation after they had defeated the Kuliuk Empire. To show his respect for the islanders' holiday, Aelin suggested that Rose and Alinda take the three diplomats to Yashunar village for a little rest and relaxation. Yashunar was a small town located just outside the heartland of Falena near Lake Siraz and a few impressive mountains. However, what made the town so famous were its hot springs, spas, and healing pools. Being from the island nations, which is also renowned for its several hot springs as well, the idea of visiting this place sounded desirable to Laszlo and the others. With the talks on hold for the rest of the summer, most of the extra guards were allowed to go home, save for those whose full-time job it was to guard the Dawn Rune. The thoughts of more traveling by water left Daniel feeling rather uneasy. Thus, Tanya told him to stay at the East Palace then. Tanya agreed to him staying only because she was sick of listening to his constant whining about the heat and his regular pining over Commander Summer. In addition, the two Marine Knights were given time off as well, but were instructed to keep an eye on Lady Tanya's pale bookworm assistant. Those early days of when they arrived the village of Yashunar were truly just what the doctor ordered. Everyone had been cranky and irritable from the summer heat. But here up in the mountains in the center of the country it was much cooler. Everyone was excited to try out all the famous spas and hot springs. When not enjoying the many tourist attractions of the town, a local lord had been kind enough to rent the royal family member and her entourage his large private cottage for them to stay at. The mansion of a cabin had several rooms and baths on the north side of the house and more rooms and baths on the south side. The Phalanans agreed to take the south rooms and the islanders were happy with the north ones. They were connected by a common area, kitchen, dining room, and study. Indeed, it was truly a vacation as all was relaxing and fairly routine for the group by this point. However, one morning, the aging Desmond couldn't find his glasses. The man could see people well enough, but had a hard time reading words unless he was up close to them. Moreover, he wanted to try out one of the more famous spas, which claimed their steam could get down deep into your pores, remove wrinkles, and take 10 years off your face. For this reason, this particular spa was quite popular with the young and middle-aged women. However, while they had separate changing rooms, the spa itself was co-ed. But Desmond was too old to care about being shy or modest over such trite things. So, after asking a few on the street about the location of this age-reducing spa, the glasses-less diplomat made his way into the establishment. Noticing no one at the front desk, he figured he would just pay the man afterwards. Grabbing a few towels from the stack near the vacant front desk, the old man made his way for the changing room. He managed to get down to his undershorts, when suddenly he heard voices. Raising his head, he turned and saw to his great surprise a red-headed woman, who seemed familiar to his aged eyes along with some other women whom he did not recognize. "Rose, is that you? What are you girls doing in the men's room?" a surprised Desmond inquired. Each, suddenly, saw the grey-haired man in their changing room wearing nothing but his underwear. A rather exposed Rose and 3 other women began screaming in shock and at the strange man to get out. One tried covering herself with her arms and the others grabbed towels that had been laying nearby. Rose yelled, "Desmond! You blind fool! This is the women's room. Get out!" Desmond tried to quickly get dressed, but an embarrassed Rose and the screaming women filled Desmond with an awkward panic. He tried to get another leg through his pants, but couldn't in the rush to exit. Again, Rose yelled for him to get out. He picked up the rest of his clothes and headed to the door with only one leg in his pants, moving as quickly as his aged body would go. The girls stopped screaming and Rose let down the towel she had used to cover herself. However, he turned back around one last time when he got to the door in order to apologize. The girls screamed anew and Rose pulled up the towel again. This time Rose not only was yelling, but cursing at him too. With that, an embarrassed Desmond hobbled out the door into the main lobby. The proprietor had returned from his errands and having heard the screams of bloody murder had come running to the entrance of the female changing room. Upon his arrival he saw a red-faced Desmond struggling in the hall to pull his pants back on. Desmond, seeing him and realizing he had been, both metaphorically and literally, caught with his pants down, explained the situation to the bewildered man. The owner got such a laugh out of the whole ordeal that he offered the ladies and Desmond a free afternoon in his spa. Rose and the ladies had had enough, but he redeemed his offer. And this time, the aged statesman made sure he used the right changing room. Before Desmond left the spa that day, the owner gave him a pat on the back saying, "I don't know any Falanin man brave enough to take a peek at Lady Rose like that and hope to live much longer. On one hand, I am very jealous of what you got to see. On the other hand, I wouldn't want to be you right now, sir." Desmond again tried to explain it was all an accident, that he really hadn't mean to go in there. That he had lost his glasses. It didn't matter, he figured. Well, at least he got a free treatment, which seemed fine with him, because after looking in the mirror on his way out, he didn't look 10 years younger, that's for sure. You get what you pay for, I guess, he thought to himself. While he didn't look younger, he, however, did still feel like a kid who had got caught with his hand in the cookie jar. He knew he would owe Rose a big apology and would need to make it up to her soon. Meanwhile, Tanya had met an older noblewoman at the cafe, who had seen her reading out on the patio sipping her tea. The aged noble had introduced herself as Lady Rovery and that she and her husband were from Lord Lake, but spent most of their time here for the healing treatments at the spas. Soon, however, they were discussing all things literary and philosophical together. She, even, told her about some strange ruins, maybe Sendarian, which were a few miles outside of the town near Cirrus Lake. In addition, Laszlo and Alinda thought it'd be nice to take a walk up the mountain path through the forest. After a few miles up the hill, they found a small precipice overlooking the valley below. From there they could see the whole village and miles more in all directions. Suddenly, thoughts of that night on the balcony overlooking the city came rushing back to both of them. Those same strong feelings from that night seemed to rekindle in them both. Laszlo looked around, half expecting a drunken Barrows to step out from behind a tree or something. But, to his relief, and hers, no one appeared. They were alone. In the next moment time stopped. The rune bearer reached his left arm around the back of her waist and pulled her close to himself. With his right hand, he gently brushed the side of her hair back with his fingers, and then cupping the back of her head with the rest of his hand, he tenderly pulled her in closer until at last their lips touched perfectly. He wanted to open his eyes to see her, but right now he dared not open them. He just wanted to savor the moment. Conversely, Alinda had reached her arms around Laszlo's sides. She closed her eyes as they kissed as well. She had figured that some things just needed to be felt and not seen. Seeing would only diminish the moment, not enhance it. No, she wanted to let her other senses roam free. As she listened carefully, she could hear his gentle breathing, and even feel his heart beating rapidly pressed next to hers. As the moment passed and the kiss ended, both pulled back. Opening their eyes at last, they merely stared at one another, a smile growing on each of their faces. Alinda looked as though she wanted to say something, so Laszlo asked her, "What? What is it?" The daughter of Elimark replied with silence at first. She knew what she wanted to say, but not wishing to ruin this most perfect of moments with talks about runes, she asked, "Can we come back here tomorrow? For like a picnic or something? I would really like that." "Sure," answered Lino's son, "that would be really fun, I think. It's a date then." "A date? Really? Great, I can't wait," she said, smiling with glee. With that, Alinda took his hand as they walked back down the mountain path in hopes of being home before dinner time. Desmond had found his glasses. They had fallen behind the stand where he had placed them the night before. Yet, at dinner that night it became fairly obvious to all that Rose was giving Desmond the silent treatment. She refused to engage him in any conversation despite the elderly man's attempt to engage her in small talk several times. She flatly rejected to even look at him. Then, as everyone was asking what was wrong, Desmond explained what had happened earlier that day and how he had misplaced his glasses and how he had failed to read the sign properly. Tanya scoffed at him for making such a mistake. Alinda was speechless when she had heard about Desmond's gaffe. Laszlo remained silent as well. He wasn't sure what to say. He just looked at Rose, who now excused herself from the table. "I feel just awful," Desmond said. "I need to make it up to her somehow. Princess Linda, you know her better than anyone else. Is there anything I can do to apologize?" Alinda thought for a moment longer and spoke up at last. "Rose really is not the kind of person to hold a grudge for very long, but she prefers actions over words. So, maybe you need to show her you are sorry somehow rather than just saying it." Desmond thought about these words for a while and said, "Thank you, Your Highness. I think I may have an idea." Tanya interrupted a bit sarcastically, "Well, here is hoping this new idea is better than your last one of leaving the cottage without your glasses." Alinda and Laszlo looked at each other unsure of what to say next or if they should say anything at all. Awkward silence filled the table. Alinda got up from her chair. "I am going to go check on Rose. Good night everyone. Good night, Sir Laszlo." With that farewell, she departed for the hallway to the south. Laszlo, also, got up, said his good nights, and started heading to the north side of the house. A small smirk filled his face as he once more thought about Desmond's retelling of his ordeal at the special spa. Indeed, his friends were many things, but boring was not one of them, he reminded himself. Tanya and Desmond remained at the table bickering with each other as old friends tend to do from time to time for a few more hours until they, also, retired for the night. The next day, Desmond arose early, went into town and made some arrangements. Everyone else got up, dressed, had breakfast, and were soon ready for a new day. Desmond approached Rose in the common room, and asked her to accompany him later around noon. He begged her and insisted that he was sorry and wanted to make things up to her. Only after Alinda urged her to go, did Rose acquiesce to go with Desmond at noon. Alinda did this not because she had pity or sympathy for Desmond, but in truth she wanted to be alone with Laszlo and could not afford to have Rose hovering around her all day. Before they all left for the day, Tanya suggested that this evening they go as a group to visit those unique ruins near Cirrus Lake that the noblewoman she had met yesterday had told her about. Everyone agreed to do this and to meet back at the cabin around dinner time to go. Laszlo looked out the window. It was cloudy, but the sun was showing in a few places. He hoped that would be a good sign. As the two left the village and made their way partially up the mountain, they held hands once more. Laszlo had her hand in his own and the picnic basket in his other free hand as they finally arrived at the same precipice as before. The growing dark clouds over the horizon made the valley look less majestic than the sunny blue sky had done yesterday, but that did not bother either of them. Alinda turned her gaze while taking in all the forest and its beauty. This spot was perfect and secluded. They were truly alone at last, just them and the picnic basket lunch. She now made eye contact with the immortal islander. She looked at his left hand and then back into his eyes. Just as she was about to say something to him, crack, the sounds of thunder echoed throughout the forest. Instantly, rain started to fall quickly and hard. Within moments they were soaking wet as though they had just jumped into a lake with all their clothes on. Laszlo grabbed the basket and her hand once more and gestured with his head to her that she should follow him. Laszlo, seeing a large old oak tree about 20 meters away, pulled them off together in that direction. His intuition was right. The large tree made a great shelter from the storm for the moment, as at least now they were not getting poured on. Laszlo pulled the blanket out of the basket. They both sat down under the tree as he wrapped the blanket around her to help her dry off some and stay warm. Alinda looked as though she wanted to cry, but not because of the reasons Laszlo thought. Yet another interruption. This was enough. Alinda thought to herself. It was now or never. The time for silence was over. The time to speak had come, rainstorm or not. She took a deep breath and started to say in a soft, but resolute, voice, Laszlo, there is something I've been wanting to ask you for some time now. Pausing as though expecting to be interrupted again by some unknown lurking presence. She waited a moment, but to her relief at last no one or nothing interrupted her, so she continued speaking. That day when those assassins attacked us, and you saved Rose and myself with your rune there, she pointed to his left hand. It was utterly amazing and terrifying what you did. I've never seen anything like it before. I'll be honest, that angel creature you summoned left me having nightmares for weeks. Laszlo tried to interrupt her with an apology, but she spoke over him in turn saying, No, it is fine, but please just let me finish. You see, it is fine now, because I realize something, which is that scary headless angel reminds me of you. Wait. No. That came out wrong. I mean. Laszlo was a bit perplexed by her comparison. He knew she was not trying to offend him, but didn't understand the reference. Moreover, he never felt comfortable talking about the rune of punishment with anyone really unless he had to. But now he felt it was one of those times when he would have to talk about it. Yet, with Alinda, he didn't feel that same sense of worry that he normally felt in his stomach when people started asking him about his dangerous true rune. Alinda, a bit embarrassed and sensing Laszlo's confusion, tried to clarify herself a bit. What I meant to say is that you and that angel you summoned, both of you protected Rose and I. But, it's more than just that. The more I thought about it over these past few months, the more I understood something profound. That angelic creature with its missing limbs had this scary aura of ominous power about it. Yet, it, also, possessed another characteristic. Because, when I felt those warm feathers touch me, I felt so completely protected by the angel being there. Yes, it obliterated all those Nethergate guys with its awesome power, but the light that came off its wings was warm and comforting too. Laszlo listened as she went on. I know it was just healing magic, like a water rune or something, because it healed Rose's injuries. But I know it was more than just that. I can't put it into words really. I felt. I was afraid, you know. But I knew I'd be okay somehow. He was astonished, he had never thought of the rune of punishment in that way really before. She followed this up by saying, likewise, with you Laszlo, as I've come to know you these past few months, I can see a greatness in you. Yet, I can also see this loneliness and distance in you too, even when you're around your friends. Like that angel, Laszlo, you are powerful, however you are missing something, like you're still incomplete. Plus, you are a great warrior. Even, Rose says, she's never seen anyone with fighting skills like yours. You seem so fearsome in battle. Yet, I know that when I am with you, I feel just as safe and protected as that day with the angel. like that no matter what happens, I know everything is going to be alright, you know? And that is why I said you are like that rune's angelic host. She concluded with a bit of trembling in her voice, but in a tone that said she was now relieved to have those mountains of secrets off her chest. At last, it was Laszlo's turn to speak. Unlike before at the waterfall at Luna's where he was tongue-tied and at a loss for words. This time it was different. This time he had his voice. Taking off his gloves and then showing her the back of his left palm, he said, "This is the rune of punishment. Like your nation's sun rune, this is one of the 27 true runes." In his captain-like voice he added, "My full name is Laszlo Enkuldis. I am the son of Lino and Renu Enkuldis, the former king and queen of the island nation of Obel. Many years ago some pirates attacked my family's ship. I was thought lost at sea after my mother." With that Laszlo told her everything about his life. He shared his memories of meeting Snow, entering the Gaian Knight Academy, and meeting his other friends there as well. He shared about how after graduating from the academy in Rizral, how he encountered the infamous pirate named Brando and the Rune of Punishment for the first time. He explained how Commander Glenn had intervened to save him, and ended up getting the rune himself. Next, Laszlo told her how the parasitic rune took Glenn's life and how that he was blamed for his murder and was exiled as a result. Plus, after the commander died, he told her how the true rune had picked him as its new host, or victim depending on your perspective. You see, that is how this rune works. From what I understand, most of the true runes have some kind of a curse or a price one must pay to use their great power. This accursed rune consumes the life force of its bearer whenever they use its awesome power until it drains them completely, turning them to ash. Alinda placed her hands over her mouth and gasped in shock and awe at Laszlo's sobering words. The islander spoke on. "The next part of my story you sort of know already. I told you about it before that day by the waterfall in Lunas. Anyhow, once I was exiled, I soon found myself caught up in the war between the islands and the Kuliuk Empire." Alinda interjected, "Oh. Kuliuk? I have heard of them. Lady Danya was reading a book about them one day when I tried to ask her about you. Sorry for interrupting. Please, go on." She finished trying to contain her interest at such a dramatic story. The immortal swordmaster explained to her the rest of the story about how they had defeated Kuliuk and the diabolical plans of Graham Cray. He tried to explain to her about Leknat as best he could. And how thanks to her and the 108 stars of destiny he had gathered to help him fight, the curse of the true rune that stole his life each time was now dormant. Furthermore, he told the princess about how few years later, he had discovered the truth about his birth. That he was not just some orphan, after all, but a long-lost prince. And that he, Lino, and Flair learned about this because of his mother's music box and the unique song that it played. Alinda seemed to have a small sympathy in her eyes now, saying, "So, you never had a chance to really meet your mother? That's so sad." Laszlo responded with a strange answer, "The rune of punishment doesn't just take your life each time you use it, but it also takes your memories too. So, the next bearer has to carry the weight of the deadly curse and many memories of all the other past bearers as well. In that way, I have seen my mother. Through her memories, I've seen how much she loved me and the rest of her family." Alinda said nothing. She wasn't sure how to respond to this statement. Not that she understood it really, but she could see that Laszlo seemed to be comforted by it. And, then it all was. The truth about Laszlo's past and how he wielded one of the 27 true runes. Now at last, Alinda knew the full truth. No more speculation or interruptions. It was finally all becoming clear to her. As she began to wrap her young mind around the power of the true rune, it dawned on her, he had been fighting wars decades before she was born and would probably keep doing so perhaps after she was dead too. He was possibly going to live forever. It was just too much for her to take it all in at once. So, you can never free yourself of this true rune that governs atonement and forgiveness? You'll never have a normal life? she asked with a tone of pity and bewilderment in her voice. No. Well, yeah, but I cannot. I mean, the 108 stars. Never mind, it would take too long to explain it all. Let's just say, I beat the True Rune's curse like I said. However, if I die or give it up, the Rune of Punishment would return to its preferred nature of harvesting innocent souls again. I cannot let that happen again. If you knew the countless numbers it has devoured over the centuries. I won't let it happen, never again. Laszlo explained, his voice now filling with determination. Alinda was now even more astonished, but finding her words she asked, all those memories of people, and yet you're alone. You have borne this curse all these decades. Alone? You don't have to. There are people who would help you. Friends. They would stand beside you, support you, care for you for as long as they could. You don't have to be alone. She took off the blanket some and wrapped him around it too and grabbed his hands with hers and then added, you have faced this thing all by yourself. You are more of a hero than I ever could have imagined. Her hands started trembling slightly as she reached for his left hand with her own. Laszlo, have you ever truly had a day of peace since becoming all of this? I mean, a moment when you felt truly happy? A time when you did not have to think about that rune? Have you ever had one good day? Laszlo looked into her eyes. His mouth made no words, but the look in his eyes told Alinda all she needed to know. With that she reached in closer to him and kissed him. The same passion was there as the kiss they had enjoyed yesterday, but this kiss was different. With all they had just shared it felt more intimate to her. But, at the same time it felt as though he was now being distant. He stopped kissing her and pulled back for a moment. The rain was starting to let up some as the downpour was now more like a soft drizzle. Then, somewhere in the recesses of his mind, Flair's letter came floating to the surface of his brain. Her words were something like, don't cut yourself off from having a good life. Don't cut yourself off from love. And yet, he was a true rune bearer after all. What kind of life could he really offer her? He asked himself. He stared into Alinda's eyes. It was clear both were thinking of the same thing, but both were hesitant to speak it. At that moment, the warrior said, Alinda, I want to be with you, but I cannot. My life is filled with too much fighting, dangerous runes, and endless life. I could not do that to you. I just can't. I am so very sorry. He finished with a great heartbreak in his voice. Laszlo had not been the only one thinking upon the advice of their older sister. Alinda, also, had been recalling the words of her sibling that night before the wedding when she said, sometimes a woman just has to initiate it, if she wants to get what she wants. Thus, she countered, her heart racing, you are a real jerk, you know? You think this is just about you. You act like this choice is just yours alone to make. Well, it's not. It is mine too. I don't care about true runes. I care about you, Laszlo. Whether I have one good day with you or 1,000 bad ones. I don't care. The point is they would be with you. With you. With you. With her fists clench, she had been hitting him on the chest each time she had repeated these final words. Tears now began to fill her face. The rain had nearly let up and the warm afternoon summer sun was starting to peek out from behind the clouds once more. After she had stopped hitting him, he drew her near to himself and held her as closely as he could. He had enveloped her small frame into his own by wrapping his arms around her and hugged her tightly as a way to say without words that everything was going to be all right. Alinda did not resist or try to pull away. In fact, she even laid the side of her head against his chest. Pressing her ear against his damp shirt she felt his heart once again, which was beating softly. After a few more minutes of this embrace, Laszlo could feel her quiet sobbing cease, so he released his grip around her. Alinda pulled back and rubbed her eyes a bit. She looked at him as though she were trying to figure out some kind of ancient riddle that seemed unsolvable. As a distraction, the princess started playing with her hair and said, "Oh, this stupid rain and humidity. My hair is just going to get all frizzy and I hate that. I hate frizzy hair and I hate that it has to be this way. She started to try and pull her hair up into some kind of manageable arrangement. I wish I had something to tie it off with. I just hate that it has to be this way. She repeated to herself while fiddling with her platinum locks. I hate that it has to be this way too. The male voice said soberly. She looked up and saw Laszlo, who had undone his red bandana complete with Leviathan silhouettes sewn into it, and he was now offering it to her. She reached out her hand to his opened hand that had the bandana laying there waiting for someone to take it. Her hand touched his. Both looked at each other with the greatest of interest, but said nothing. Was it only a moment? Or had it been an hour? Maybe, it had been a century? Time seemed to have stopped for both of them. Laszlo did not know how or why, but they had just stared at each other holding hands with his bandana sandwiched between them for what seemed like forever. And without warning, both started kissing each other again. Words, again, were useless to them at this point. Now they were communicating all their feelings through their actions. After several more moments of communicating, they stopped if only to catch their breath. The former Prince of Obel smiled a real smile of joy. It had been decades since he felt so carefree, so happy, in a single moment of time. He didn't care about the future or what came next for them. Because, right now in this one moment, he was for the first time in decades, no, maybe his whole life, truly happy. He simply was having a good day. Indeed, at this point words would only get in the way of them sharing how they really felt toward one another. And in this way, both had said to each other, I love you. Yet, not a single phrase needed to be uttered. You hear that? Whispered Laszlo. I don't hear anything, whispered the princess back. He continued in his normal voice, exactly. The rain has stopped. We should head back to the village before it starts anew. Let us eat something first, added Alinda. Nodding in agreement, both quickly ate some of the food they had brought with them. After lunch, they made their way back down the mountain pass to the small tourist community, and finally to the large empty cottage. Rose and the others are still out, observed Alinda upon entering the house. Yeah, I think Desmond wanted to make it up to Rose for the incident yesterday by taking her out to lunch and whatnot as an apology. He wanted to share some of his old war stories with her too, I think. And Tanya met a local noblewoman with her own private library collection. So, 3 guesses as to where she is. Looks like we got the place to ourselves for a while, replied Laszlo with a sigh of relief. Alinda returned this with a smile, at last. Good. Now, I can have you all to myself for a while without distractions from drowning elves, drunken buffoons, curious roommates, or bad weather. At this she grabbed him by the hand and began to lead him to her side of the house as her sister's advice still rang out in her mind. Come on, let's get out of these wet clothes already, the platinum hair woman said in a rather seductive cadence. He naively responded, but, my dry clothes are in my room and that's on the other side of this house. With her one hand still grasping and leading him, she stopped, spun a bit on her heel, and faced toward him. With her free hand, she placed her index finger on his lips and gestured with a whisper, I know. At these words, reality was catching up to him. He said nothing else, and followed her lead. And so it was, for the first time in both their lives, they knew each other as deeply as a man and woman could know one another. Thus, for the second time this day, words could not do their feelings justice. Some time later, he kissed her farewell and returned to his own room before anyone else had a chance to arrive. Now, he just simply laid on his bed fully relaxed and at peace. Then, like a lightning strike, reality came crashing upon him in a flash. It occurred to him. For the first time in years, he had spent nearly the whole day and not once had the rune of punishment been a weight on his soul. Yeah, he had explained everything to her himself, but after telling her about his rune, it had not even entered his thoughts for the rest of the day. It had been decades since he felt like a normal man. But, today amazingly enough he had felt at peace, even if only for a few hours. Here in this place together with her, harmony and serenity were once again his familiar friends. They had been strangers and foreigners to him for over 30 years. Letting out a final sigh of relief, he said to himself, "Hey Flare, I guess maybe my wish finally came true after all. How about that?" He said this part in reference to that night he was on the beach with his sister counting the stars. They had seen a shooting star and he had made his secret wish, which was to know peace again. Suddenly, these thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a door slamming and two voices talking to each other. He arose from his bed and made his way down the hall to the common area where he saw Rose and Desmond talking in a cordial and friendly way. "You two friends again?" asked the old sword master with a bit of sarcasm. "Your comrade here bought me lunch and regaled me with old war stories of heroism and epic fighting. So yeah, I'll consider his apology acceptable for now," said Rose in her semi-serious, semi-playful voice. Desmond smiled an elderly man's mischievous smile. This was the kind of smile of one who had just gotten away with something big, and had received no real punishment for it, because of his age. Seeing this smirk on his lips, Rose made a granite gesture with her hand by placing it on her side hip over a knife encased in its leather sheath attached to her belt. She added in a very dramatic and threatening tone, "You're forgiven. For now. But you better understand this. If you ever have an accident like that again, it will cost you far more than just a few potch for an apology lunch. No, you, so will be losing more than just your coins. If you catch my drift." Putting his political skills of being able to quickly change the subject from an uncomfortable one to a more pleasing topic, Desmond interjected in a rather casual voice, "So, Laszlo, if you're here, is Her Majesty here too?" Rose, likewise, felt compelled to start looking around the room for her charge. "Yeah, she is in her room. I think," she said, "she was wanting to take a bath or something. We got caught in the rain and whatnot earlier today. I guess she wanted to warm up and relax a bit," answered the warrior with this half-truth. The Queen's Knight replied, "Oh, I see. Well, I am going to go check on her then. Perhaps afterwards, we can find Lady Tanya and go visit those ruins we talked about earlier." Both men nodded at the sound of a peaceful stroll and a small adventure to visit Sirrah's Lake. Heading toward their side of the cottage, Rose looked over her shoulder at Desmond as she headed toward the bath and muttered, "You better not get any more ideas, old man." Desmond laughed in his grandfatherly fashion with a little blush in his cheeks. "No ma'am. No ideas." As she left the common room, Laszlo interjected, "You need to be careful there, old friend. The redheads in this country seem to be more ferocious than the ones in our own." Shaking his head in agreement, the grey-haired man stated, "That they are, Laszlo. That they are. Well, you know about my date with my Falanan lady. Tell me, how was yours?" He said nothing and just looked down to the ground, avoiding eye contact with the elder statesman. A little more color than normal filled his face. The senior public servant had been reading people's body language for years. Thus, he said with a smile, "Ah, I see. That well, eh? Well, she is attractive no doubt. Beautiful princesses always seem to fall for the dashing heroes like you and not us normal fellas." This last part, Desmond said while looking into a nearby mirror after turning his gaze away from Laszlo. Thus, this comment of Desmond's struck Laszlo as odd in that it seemed to be more directed at himself than toward Laszlo. Did he mean? Had he liked Flare? Quickly, the two men returned to small talk about the powerful rainstorm today. Soon they heard Alinda and Rose giggling with each other as they returned to the living room. Laszlo looked at her, but she didn't in return. Though he could tell she wanted to, but was forcing herself not to look. Maybe, it would be too awkward after all that had occurred between them this afternoon. And by doing so now with Rose and Desmond standing right there, it could bring up a lot of questions that neither really wanted to talk about right now with the others. Thus, after retrieving Tanya from Lady Rovery's residence, they went off to visit Sirrah's Lake. After arriving, they found the ruins next to the lake, and realized they were, indeed, ancient Sindarian. Speculation about what they could have been used for broke out amongst the five. Each theory seemed more outlandish, improbable, and more imaginative than the last. Only Danya seemed to offer up a legitimate hypothesis by this point. She suggested that if these ruins were anything like the Sindarian ruins back home, then they probably contained some kind of mechanical mechanisms that most likely had something to do with the ancient lake given its proximity to the ruins. The historian added, the Sindarians never did anything by accident or without a good reason. Their knowledge of runes and use of advanced technologies still leaves us scholars in awe and utterly perplexed even to this day. Normally, Laszlo didn't mind Danya's professorial lectures, but today was different. He had something far more contemporary on his mind than these old ruins, and that something was Alinda. It was clear to him during the walk back and even during dinner. She was thinking about him too and how all that they had done today would change things for them tomorrow. However, right now, the dual sword master knew a piece he had never known before, even prior to him becoming a true rune bearer. That night in bed he realized, Alinda had been right. He was like his runic headless angel, both were incomplete. But, now with Alinda, he was starting to feel different. Was he, after nearly 5 decades, finally starting to become whole himself thanks to this princess of Falena? Back in Stormfist, Princess Syra was asleep as Lord Godwyn left their bridal chambers and headed for his private office. Sitting at his desk, the fireplace roaring behind him as he enjoyed a glass of fine spirits. His plan was coming together thoroughly, he thought. Suddenly, there was a quiet knock on the door. Godwyn's personal attendant walked in. "I am sorry for disturbing you so late, my lord, but I saw the light on in your window and you ordered me tell you immediately if my spies learned anything interesting about Barrows or our island visitors." Marcus set his wine glass down and sat up in his chair. He was now paying attention as he said, "Well, what is it? Out with it. I am expecting another guest soon and don't have time for guessing games." The servant withdrew 2 letters from his coat pocket and handed them to Godwyn. The future commander took them from the man's hand without standing up. Reading the first, he smirked to himself, and mumbled something about Barrow's foolishness under his breath. The attendant couldn't make it out fully, but he remained at attention. However, as Godwyn read the second letter, a look of astonishment fell upon his face. "I can't believe this. Ha ha, this is great. Our little princess and that strange Alinda. This new development changes things, but he does not know about this. This could work in my favor if handled carefully." Godwyn spoke more to himself than his confused servant. Marcus came back to his senses. He looked at his employee, who seemed like he was waiting for new instructions. The nobleman ordered him to repeat none of this information to anyone. Godwyn threatened to kill him and his whole family if he did. The fearful man now lifted his trembling hand over his heart as though he were making a vow or a promise. He quickly left the room as Marcus waved him away with his hand. The last thing the servant saw as he departed the room was Godwyn standing up and tossing the 2 communiques into the fire. About an hour later, a dark voice called out from the shadows in the corner of the room, "Lord Godwyn, it is I, Hakon, commander of the Nethergate forces and servant of the Dark Lord Nyoka." Godwyn replied, "About damn time. I was getting sleepy from waiting here all night. I know who you are, fool. Now, tell me, what new information do you have?" The man stepped forward from the shadows wearing a black mantle that covered his face from view. The shadowy figure spoke again in the same whispery voice, "The Master's army is ready at last. He has only one final hindrance standing in his way before he can set his hordes free upon Falena. That is why he has returned to Nagara before beginning his campaign. But, very soon all shall be ready. War shall be upon this nation before the month's end." The Falena sighed, but said calmly, "So be it." The hooded Nethergate assassin was about to leave, but turned round and asked, "Before I go, is there anything you require of me before I return to my master?" Yes, actually, ordered Godwin. First, remind your master of our deal. Which he had better keep his end of. I will allow him to retain the lands currently held by the Dragon Cavalry and their fortress city of Sauronix, but no more. If he tries to double-cross me, he will have hell to pay. Annoyed by this disrespect toward his master, the cloaked man wanted to say something, but biting his tongue instead asked, "Is that all?" Godwin responded, "No, I have a few more errands for you to run. The next phase of my own plan to destroy the Ethelbald's family legacy once and for all, as well as take his family's land for my own, shall soon commence." At these words, Godwin handed the hooded man a stack of official-looking letters that seemed to be in opened envelopes bearing the Nagara seal. Hakon recognized the official seal and the old letters as the ones his master and Godwin had been exchanging for months. They were nameless, but the information on them would be highly incriminating and treasonous if anyone had ever caught Godwin in possession of them. The greedy noble gave him these letters with the instructions to secretly plant them in the house of Aelin's awkward nephew, Emrates Ethelbald. This was the same Emrates who was in line to take over managing the family affairs once Aelin was dead. Moreover, he liked to talk to himself and sometimes even talked to trees. Emrates, also, liked to spend a lot of time deep down in the caves and sewers of Stormfist doing only God knows what. The perfect patsy, thought Godwin to himself. In addition, Godwin quickly penned 2 new letters, because of the latest information he had just learned from his personal servant. He gave orders that both of these new letters were to be delivered to their intended readers anonymously. With all these parchments in hand, the dark figure backed up into the shadowy corner once more and in a moment vanished in a flash. Marcus turned his face back toward the now dying fire. The embers of the earlier letter still glowed slightly. Once more he laughed with cruel intentions. With that he finished his drink and went back to bed with glee, knowing that tomorrow would be the beginning of the end for the Ethelbald's power hold on this city and on the Quendom of Falena. Moreover, the war was about to begin. Thus, ends Act 1.